Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the second half of Norway Chess 2025 and we have got some amazing games. It is, of course, headlined today by Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen, who yesterday was irate at himself for losing the game against Gukesh, bashing the table, the pieces jumping all over the place. It was an insane scene. He was a sportsman afterwards, as he always is, the consummate professional Magnus Carlsen. I say that maybe with a bit of tongue in cheek after the past months. But of course, Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura headline this, but that is not the only important game. Magnus Carlsen leads tied with Fabiano Caruana. So Fabi, while Magnus plays Hikaru, Fabi could take the lead if he betters Magnus's result today against Wei Yi. And we've of course got the Battle of the Indians, the world champion Gukesh versus Arjun Erigaisi, and we are going to be starting with that game. Arjun Erigaisi and Gukesh the world champion. E4, and Arjun plays a pierced defense. Like, you only play this to win. Like, this is some sharp stuff. Knight to f6. When you play the pierced, it is, you invite an attack. You invite imbalance, and you invite white to have a better position a lot of the time. Knight to c3 and g6, and some of you will have played the pierced, and it can transition into similar positions as like a King's Indian. But we get this, and look at this line. Look at this. Knight takes e4. The sacrifice of the knight. What do you mean? How does the knight sacrifice work? Well, takes this. And this is the big idea, like a center fork trick. Beautiful idea from Arjun. Obviously some prep. He's still got, he's only used 5 minutes. Probably most of that has been used writing the moves. And here, we get bishop takes f7 from Gukesh. So he sacrifices the piece back to get the pawn back. So there's no material imbalance at the moment. We get d5, kicking the knight out of the center. It goes back to c3. You can also here go to g3, which, psychologically, I would probably play knight to g3 because it seems stupid to go back, and you might want to play c3 in the future. But Gukesh, much better player than I am, knight to c3. He wants his knight on c3, and now c5 from black. Look at Arjun taking the initiative. Gukesh already down 30 minutes, 50 minutes against Arjun's clock, but 30 minutes of his own time, and it's move 9. Arjun is 14 minutes in the tank here, so these players are exploring some wild stuff here. And here, the best move is to take this pawn. And yes, you get d4, but you can just play like knight e2, and you'll be fine. Instead, Gukesh castles and allows c takes d4, which is better for black. You can see the eval bar here, below the orange line. It's better for black because look at black's play now. It is so active. And they get to march the d-pawn down the board and, attack the knight and put pressure on the knight. And c3 is not it. And now, Arjun is better if and only if he plays in this position bishop to f5. Putting pressure on the knight, and there are a few things you can do here. What you can do is you can play knight f to d2. You can move the knight. You can also play queen to d3. And you can also play knight to g3. These are the ideas. So knight to g3, where the knight maybe should have gone many moons ago to disallow this bishop to f5 move. And now here you would get bishop takes h3. It would lead to this tactic because both pieces see the knight. So if you take, then probably rook takes f3 is better, and then you can always sacrifice and stuff like this. And this would be completely winning for Arjun Erigaisi. Instead of bishop to f5 and putting pressure on the knight in the center, he plays the immediate d3, just pushing the pawn forward, suffocating. But what this allows is for Gukesh to play rook e3, and then after bishop to f5, now you can play knight to g3, and the knight's defended. There is no bishop sacrifice. So now we get rook d8, just adding more defenders to that important d-pawn. If that d-pawn is going to be, this is going to choke Gukesh's position, but if he can win it, he's going to alleviate so much pressure. And he might even still be able to blockade it and, start fighting back. So we get bishop to d2 and e5 from black. And now Gukesh has two good choices. he can play queen to b3, looking for a queen trade, because you would start pinning stuff. You probably wouldn't trade. You'd play like queen b3, and then maybe like b5, and trade the queens on your terms if you're black. The only other move to hold here is queen e1. So you slide out of this, and you reinforce your rook so that you can have pressure and not allow the pawn to get to e4. Instead of that, seeing that the pawn is coming, he plays knight e1, which is not good enough because we get e4. And Arjun Erigaisi is better against the world champion. f3, and now simply queen c5. You pin the rook, and it's a problem, and the bishop's got eyes, and the rook's got eyes, and the rook's got eyes, and the knight's got eyes, and the whole white position deteriorates. Instead of that, e takes f3 allows the knight to get back in the game. You probably wanted to keep that knight on e1, and now bishop to e6 going backwards, because for a long time you couldn't take this because this pawn, you would capture with the pawn, and then you would have like a 3-pawn chain just marching down the white position. Now you have to move the bishop out the way, and now we get knight to e4. And, it's not the best move, but Gukesh's pieces are starting to come alive. Arjun is still better. Don't get that wrong. And, knight e5 comes, and yes, we can trade, but Arjun's pieces are better. He's got a better pawn. But now queen e1, and rook df8, and now knight to g3. And now Arjun has only one move to find to be better, and it's the incredible rook to f2. And some of you might be tempted to try and take this, to try and get the two pieces for the queen. It's not a bad idea, but now bishop to f4. Bishop to f4, wins the house. And Arjun would win. So you can't really do that. Arjun has to find rook f2. He doesn't. He plays bishop to f4 now. And what this allows is rook takes e6. You can take this, which hits the queen. But rook takes g6 check, I think was missed. And the rook survives, kind of. The king attacks it. But now you can play queen e6. Gukesh is up a pawn. Queen takes, rook takes, Gukesh is up a pawn. Bishop to f4, knight to f1, Gukesh is up a pawn. Bishop c7, Gukesh is up a pawn. Rook d1. Rook d7 is an inaccuracy, and now Gukesh might be better. Knight d2, bishop b6 check, king to h1, and king g7, knight to f3. Look at Gukesh's pieces. I will remind you, he's up. No! Gukesh is so much better here if he just plays like g3 or g4 or rook d2 or knight d2. No, rook d2 is just fine, not knight d2 again. He's just got to be patient. Instead, he brings his knight forward, and oh no, Arjun here holds everything together with rook e7, just pinning. I know they've got minutes on the clock, but this just looks so natural. There's no knight checks as a discovery, and you can force pieces off the board, and you might give up this temporarily, but you should have given it up anyway. So knight e5 is not punished, and now Gukesh is just better. Check, and we can start hunting the black king. The black king goes all the way to the back rank. Your king should not be on the back rank. It needs to be active in the endgame. Arjun is still counting on this, the fact that this pawn is 2 squares away from queening. But how do you get that pawn through? It's well surrounded. Oh, check. Rook g8 check. The winning move here for Gukesh is to play knight e5. And he can also play knight takes b6. Knight takes b6 might be a bit cleaner. You'd probably play rook takes b6. And then rook f2 maybe. And there is none of this because check. You would trade the rook and then you would take this. So there is no pushing d2 at the moment. And this is just better for Gukesh. Instead of that, he gives another check. And now he gives another check. And now the king goes back. Bring the king forward. King e6. It looks like your king's getting more exposed. You need your king to be active. You cannot be cut off on the back rank. King e8 is an atrocious move from Arjun Erigaisi, according to the engine. Not according to me. I might play king e8. Really. Now knight e5 is found by Gukesh after that brief repetition. Now check. And now check. Are they going to repeat moves? Is Gukesh going to repeat moves in a winning position? Rook g8 check? No, now he takes. And we take the pawn. And this should all be fine. And from here, you've just got to consolidate your position. Because Gukesh is just up 2 pawns. We trade off some pawns, check. Like, the king is now active, but it was really stalled earlier. And we win a couple of pawns as white. And Gukesh just cleans up. There was another mistake from Arjun. Gukesh blunders back. And it wasn't the cleanest conversion in terms of stockfish conversions, but it was beautiful from the world champion. He marched his king all the way up the board, protected it, and eventually was able to stop the checks and give a couple of his own and push the pawns up the board. And push the pawns up the board he did. A check, which got a rook trade, and this is just completely winning for white because the knight will sacrifice itself and there will be 1 white pawn remaining. The bishop sacrifices itself and knight a5, because when the pawn pushes you will just sacrifice the knight. This pawn will promote. Came down to 1 pawn, but Gukesh was up a pawn and he wins the game. And this was in the classical portion, so he gets 3 points. You know what else was settled in the classical portion? Oops. Let's go all the way out of here. Fabiano Caruana and Wei Yi. Fabiano played a ready, and he caught Wei Yi early with some of the stuff he was playing here. Bishop e3. You push the bishop out, and look at this. Fabi, always Fabi, with his opening preparation. He gets a. He doesn't really get that much of a time advantage right now, but just catching Wei Yi with some haymakers early, in terms of opening prep, and he was down on time for a large portion of this, and it looked very equal. You might say, wait, hang on, isn't this free bishop? No, because the queen's hanging. So look at the whole board. So we hit the queen. Oh, danger levels. So we take back. Now the queen trade, and basically this was the position after 22 moves. Fabi may have had a nice opening surprise, but it surprised Wei Yi, but Fabi didn't really get anything, and he's down 10 minutes on the clock. He is up a pawn, though, but I don't think it's going to be as important as Gukesh's being up a pawn. So, bishop to d5, or will it? Bishop h3, and now are we going to repeat moves? No. Knight b6, rook b8, and now we trade bishop for knight. Wei Yi was up 2 bishops, but he could get the, so you might say, wait, hang on, can't black just do this? Yeah, you don't want to go into this endgame, so you rather protect your pawn and let white try and hang on to it, but this is just, like, these 2 bishops are of opposite color, so if you can generate an attack, you'll be fine. White's up a pawn, and that is probably not enough. Like, Fabiano Caruana needs some Magnus Carlsen aura here to try and win this endgame. He's still down a couple minutes on time, but it doesn't matter. If the rooks get traded, this game ends, because you've got the same pawn structure here, and white is only up a pawn. If this pawn perishes, all hope is lost. And look at that. Black looking to infiltrate, white protects the pawn, keeps their rook alive, starts targeting the bishop, the king protects the bishop, and we, bring the pieces around the board, f4, we get a trade, slightly changing the pawn structure, but, it's still the same. But now you maybe do have some weaknesses here on the H file. White, this is their greatest asset and their liability, because they've got to constantly worry about defending that. H5, king f3, h4, h3. Now what do you do? Because that pawn's well defended. It's on a dark square. Thankfully, you managed to get it on a dark square. Fabi could have considered pushing h4, but unfortunately, the bishop's also protecting that square. So there was no way to keep the pawn on a light square. So he does his best. He doesn't allow it to get to h3. And now bishop to d6 is the wrong move. There are a couple moves holding here, but what Wei Yi really needs to do is to move the rook. The bishop is perfectly placed, and the king cannot be extracted from it, and you can't target the base of the pawn chain. So you need a rook move here. So you need to play rook a2 or rook d2. You need to just play like a waiting move with your rook, because whites can't really push their position too much. So you need to be patient. Bishop to d6 is trying to do too much, because the king comes forward now. Now rook a2, but now f5. And White just gets a little bit of play here, and all of a sudden, Fabiano Caruana is completely winning. And you might say, but hang on, he's still only up a pawn. Yeah, but the black king is now pinned in the back rank. Before it had pawns, it could run behind the pawns. And the black bishop was protecting it. Now look at the white bishop protecting this pawn, protecting this pawn. You might say, but how do you protect that pawn? Well, that pawn's going to fall. So white might be up 2 pawns. And the thing is, they're far apart, which is harder to defend in this type of endgame. Bishop to e7 looks to defend the pawn. There are certain points where you might sacrifice the rook for the pawn. If the pawns fall off, white can 100% sacrifice the rook. b4, you obviously cannot take that. Now rook e3, b5, and rook to sh3 is the final nail in the coffin for Wei Yi, who is now... Look at this endgame. Look at this endgame. The last few moves, right? Where it started all falling apart. 30 minutes to 22 seconds, right? 2 minutes to 20, giving a check. Because he realized here, I might have messed up. And like, he spent so much time. Look at this, 55 seconds to 20 minutes. It's not enough time to play an endgame where you've got to defend practically. And every move, it just got worse. Fabi wasn't perfect, but he's got 13 minutes versus 20 seconds. Now b7, look at the pawn. It goes all the way back here. Well blockaded with the rook and the dark square bishop. It just magically got to b7. And now bishop to d6 attacks the rook. The pawn promotes. Rook to f3. You know what's the brilliant thing? Because you took this pawn and the bishop was protecting it over there, you can't get your rook to this magic square to try and stop promotion. So, we did not want to go all the way to the start of the game. And now what's it done? Messing with the frame of the camera. Yeah, so bishop d6, rook here. We play rook f3, but b8 queen. Fabiano Caruana wins and takes the lead because the Magnus Hikaru game was settled in Armageddon. This was settled in Armageddon. The players made a very quiet draw. I'm not covering the game. Magnus Carlsen. Hikaru has now lost 3 in a row. Magnus Carlsen had a heartbreaking loss today. Neither of these players can really afford to lose because I think if Hikaru loses this and doesn't win the next 3 games that come, he's gonna call it. Like he has said before this tournament, he's not pursuing the World Championship if it doesn't go well. I don't know what well is in his term because I think he's still sitting 4th or 5th or 3rd, somewhere around there. I don't think he's bottom. He might be, but he's not losing classical games. So we get a semi-Slav. And we get this peculiar line where Magnus gives up the pawn and doesn't try to win it back immediately, but goes for this pressure. Almost Catalan-esque pressure in the semi-Slav, where he's got the fianchettled bishop, he's going to jump his knight into e5, and he's going to play b3, and b4 is not it from Hikaru. But remember, Hikaru's got draw odds. So Magnus has to push, and he's pushing in Magnus ways. Look at Hikaru. Look, this structure is beautiful. If you could join it like this, you'd be perfect. But unfortunately, that would hang a fork. Hikaru's hanging onto the pawn with all he can, but it's being undermined the whole time. And now look at what Magnus does. He makes such a beautiful practical decision. He plays knight takes c3. You might say, hang on, isn't that the sacrifice of a knight? Yes, it is. Bishop takes c3. If bishop takes c3, you've got knight to c4. Yes, 100% giving up the rook, but threatening the fork of the king and the queen. So queen b8 prevents there being a fork, but you still have knight d6 and king d8. And now simply, you can try and take here, but you don't want to do that. You can take on... Oh, yes, you can. Knight takes f7, check, king e8. And now the best thing to do, you can take the rook, but you can give another check. So you win the pawn, king d8 again. And now probably taking on b7 with check. Because what happens here is now you can play rook c1. And the whole position falls apart because of that bishop. And everything just collapses. So you've got bishop b4. And now it's simply just bishop takes c6. And the problems fall apart for Hikaru's position. So Magnus, beautiful knight sacrifice. In other words, Hikaru just castles. So we go through all that. He castles. But look at the time. Look at the time. Magnus has equaled the time. He's still up on time, but it's not the 3-minute disadvantage that Hikaru had. So Hikaru has gone too slowly. Magnus is equaling Hikaru's equaling on the clock, rather, I should say. I've got that the wrong way around. Hikaru wants the time to be more equal because he's got draw odds. But I think Magnus is applying pressure and he's better. Like, Magnus is better and it, like, came out of nowhere. Like, with a beautiful knight sacrifice, and he wins a pawn. The question will be, can he hold on to that pawn? Because his knight is under severe pressure, so he has to give up his pride and enjoy his bishop. But it is for a good purpose. Now rook c1, and he's better. He's making some practical choices. I think that's what you're saying about Magnus. He commits to h4 when he didn't need to. He now plays knight to c5, which is a mistake according to the engine. But it's giving Hikaru practical difficulties to solve, so we get a trade of rooks. Magnus is up a pawn. If the heavy pieces get traded, it's probably a draw. So he's got to keep the heavy pieces on, and look at Hikaru. He's like, damn it, I'm going for Magnus's king. I'm going to find Perpetual, and we're going to end this game in a draw. e4 is a beautiful move from Magnus Carlsen. D takes e4, rook e1. We don't even take back, obviously, because everything would hang. So queen e3. Now h takes g6. F takes g3. How is Magnus like doing this with a straight face? After yesterday, he's just mad. And this is what happens when Magnus Carlsen gets mad. He plays some of the most beautiful chess. You almost want Magnus to get mad. King g7, king g2, we move the kings. Rook h8 is a slight inaccuracy. And queen f3, queen takes e4. And now, the best thing for Hikaru to do is to take this pawn. Not to trade queens, but to take this pawn. Because even though there will be a queen trade, and you'd probably take with the d pawn here, this is very much drawable probably for Hikaru. Magnus still has chances, he's still up a pawn, but it's very much drawable because Magnus' structure. He doesn't have his structure, even though black has got these. The lightweight bishop can defend that all day. This pawn is very hard to push, and this will probably get traded. So it will come down to the g pawn, which with the king and the rook on the same side can blockade it. So this is probably holdable for Hikaru. But he doesn't take the pawn. He tries to hunt Magnus's king and he plays queen h3 check. Giving a check never looked so natural, but he missed. I think that he thought maybe Magnus would play like king f2. Magnus can play king f3. And even though you can go here, looking to threaten like a skewer, he can play king f4. And queen h2 is not good enough because now check. And you can take the bishop, because even though there's queen g2, now you're here. And rook a1 ends the game. Because it is mate 9. Hikaru's king, which he neglected to go on attack, is getting mated. You have to look for Perpetual, so queen, you would play something like queen d2 check. But simply king g4. And you have no more checks to give. Everything is protected, so you would have to play like f5 check, at which point I can play en passant. And now you have rook h4 check, sacrificing the rook. It's mate 9. And Magnus Carlsen defeats Hikaru Nakamura. Hikaru loses 4 in a row. Magnus Carlsen ends the drought, if you can say that, and he gets his win back in Armageddon. So Fabiano Caruana leads Norway Chess after 7 rounds. He leads by 1.5 points. Magnus scoring 1.5 today. Fabiano scoring 3. An incredible performance from Fabiano Caruana, and he is the candidate. He's the only one qualified for the candidate so far, and he's not given up on the World Championship. He wants it very, very much.